Moed Katan Daf contains 3 Mishnayos and 4 distinct sugyas. The first is the conclusion of the sugya about taras and how we know that it depends on the Kohen's declaration. There's no automatic taras tuma. The Gemara will give sources for that. Then our first Mishnah will discuss the halachos of doing a kvura, the burial of the dead on Chol HaMoed. Is that a problem because of avelus? The Gemara will have another Mishnah on the same subject, more specifically about creating graves and doing other things for the benefit of the dead. And the third Mishnah will introduce the topic of doing a wedding, getting married on a Chol HaMoed. Is that permitted or not? So first of all, the Gemara has said that when a person has a nega taras, even if it's the type that makes him tamei, he doesn't actually become tamei until the Kohen declares it, and the Kohen can choose not to look at it on certain days so as not to be forced to declare tumah on those days. The Gemara had said that is learned at the pasuk, and on the day that it will appear, on the day that it will be seen, healthy flesh, it's the son of Tumah, he will become Tameh. So where do you see from there that it's up to the Kohen to decide whether he wants to look at it that day or not? And if he doesn't see it that day, there's no Tumah automatically. So Gemara says, Machlokas Abaye and Rava. According to Abaye, it's from the extra Vav. It shouldn't say, Uveyayim Heira Oizbay, it should just say, Beyayim Heira Oizbay. The day that he sees it, that the day that a sign of Tumah appears, that is the day that he will become Tameh. The day, and on the day, Uveyayim, that's to tell me that that you can choose the day that you want. Now, that's Abaye's opinion. Rava says the entire Ubayim is extra. It should just say, Uveheira Oizbay Basachaya Yitma. When a sign of Tumah arrives, it will become Tameh. Why does it have to say Uveyayim on the day? To tell you can pick the day. If there's something about this day that you don't want to look at it that day, you don't have to. So says the Gemara, why does Abaye not say like Rava? Why does Rava not say like Abaye? So the Gemara says that Rava said the entire Bayim is extra. Abaye said that is not extra. That is needed to tell me that I only look at taras during the day. You don't look at taras at night. So Rava says no, that you need for that halacha that you only look at taras during the day and not at night. That's learned from the fact that it says the kol mari einei hakohen, that the eyes of the kohen should see it. That means that the kohen is seeing it without help. He's just looking at it during the day. If you have to have a flashlight to be able to see it, then it doesn't fulfill the kol mari einei hakohen. So Gemara says no. Abaye says that l'chol mari einei hakohen to teach me that he has to be able to see with both eyes. He can't be blind in one eye. It says to all the vision of the eyes of the kohen. So Gemara says Rava really agrees to that. It is the source. So then he needs a different source for the fact that you have to look at taras during the day, not at night, and that's from when the person has taras on his house, he comes to the Kohen and he says, Kenega nira li babayis. Something like a nega appeared to me, meaning I saw it with my own eyes and not with aided eyes on my house. Now Abaye says that's not enough of a source because that only tells you that taras of the house can only be seen during the day. How do you know that taras on a person could also only be seen during the day? Over there you may think that that's different. There you're allowed to look at it with aided light, and therefore he has to say that you need the extra bayayim. Rava says no, you don't need that. You could just learn it out of the same source. You don't have any reason to think that it'll be different on his body, and therefore bayayim is extra, and use it to teach me that the Kohen can look at it on whichever day he chooses. Okay, now we get to our next Mishnah. Mishnah discusses if a person has the remains of his father or his mother, the bones of his father or his mother, that were not zocha tekvura, and he wants to go bury them now. So is he allowed to bury them? So the Gemara says that Rabbi Meir says yes, because it's a simcha, to rejoice that they finally get to bring his parents to kvura, to burial. Rabbi Yossi says no, he's in mourning, and you don't allow mourning on Yom Tov, and therefore you shouldn't do this on Chol HaMoed. Now the Mishnah ends off and it says you should not arouse people on the dead, and you should not do hespedim, you shouldn't do eulogies within 30 days preceding the regal, within 30 days preceding Yom Tov. So the Gemara explains, arousing the people on the dead means that they used to hire a mourner. His job would be to go around house to house, and he would wake people up, and he would say hespedim, and he would arouse them to cry with him for the loss of the dead. You're not supposed to do that within 30 days of the Yom Tov. Now, the Gemara discusses the collecting of the bones of the father and the mother to bury them. The Gemara says that our Mishnah has claimed that Rabbi Meir holds that it's a simcha. The Gemara says there is a contradiction to that. There's a brisa that says you should mourn about it the whole day. So Rav Chisda even adds, and he says, even if you've had the remains with you stored away the entire time that there is no kfura, there is mourning. So how could you say that it's a simcha to move the bones to burial? And our answer is no, we didn't mean to say that moving the bones to burial is a simcha. We meant to say that Yom Tov is a simcha. Since the Yom Tov is a simcha, and the guy's going to be too happy, he's not going to show proper mourning for the remains. And therefore, because he's too happy on Yom Tov, you shouldn't do that procedure of moving the remains to burial on Yom Tov. Alright, now the Gemara wants to know why 30 days? We said you cannot hire a mourner to arouse people to cry for the loss of the dead within 30 days before Yom Tov. Why 30 days? So the Gemara says because it was an incident that happened where somebody raised money to go to be Ola Regel, to go to travel to Yerushalayim for the Yom Tov, and his wife used it to pay off the mourner. He knocked on the door after he did the job, he asked for the salary, and she gave him the money, and therefore he wasn't able to go to Yerushalayim. And therefore we said, you're saving money to go to Yerushalayim, don't hire mourners so close to Yom Tov within 30 days, so you should be able to use the money to go to Yerushalayim. Now, Shmuel has a different shot. He says the reason is because it takes 30 days for people to forget. It takes 30 days for people to go back to real life, to move on. And if you're going to make people mourn, they're going to be sad and in mourning for 30 days. Don't do that within 30 days of the Yontif, so they shouldn't be sad on the Yontif itself. Okay, now we begin our second Mishnah. This Mishnah discusses preparing graves or storage places for the dead. So they used to store them for a brief period in a structure, and then they would move them to a final kavur later. So the Mishnah says you're not allowed to dig kuchin and kavaros on Yom Tif, but you are allowed to begin using. You're allowed to be mechanech the kuchin and the kuchin on Yom Tov. And it says you're allowed to make a nivreches, and you're allowed to make an aron, that's the coffin, if the dead is in the courtyard. If the niftar is there in the courtyard where you're actually making the wood, that means that you're taking trees and you're planing them into planks in order to be able to make the coffin. And the reason you need to have the dead there is because the people should understand that this is for the tzarech of the mace. And if the dead's in a different chutzner, in a different courtyard, then people think this is just regular work you're doing on Chol HaMoed, and that would appear to be aser. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says even if you have the dead there, you can't make planks. You have to have planks already made, then you can knock them together to be a coffin. Now, the Gemara needs to define these things. We mentioned kuchin, kavaros, and nivreches. So the Gemara says kuchin is where you dig something in the ground and you store them in the ground. Kavaros is a structure, it's an above ground structure, it's a temporary holding. And the Gemara quotes a brisa that explains this as well specifically. Then we said you could be mechanech the kutin. What does mechanech mean? The Gemara says it means to perfect it, that it should fit. If it's too long, you make it shorter. If it's too narrow, you make it wider, so that it should fit. Now, what's in the vreches? So Rabbi Yehuda says that is a bikia. For the Gemara tells us what that is. The Gemara says it can't be because of a brisa that I mentioned in the vreches and a bikia, it's two separate things. So the Gemara says it refers to a pool of water used for washing. It's laundry. And you have a big one and a small one, and one is the nivreches and one is the bikia, and the water is in the large wash pool, and the small one is meant to catch the overflow. So that's called the small one. The Gemara calls it a giha and a bar giha. Okay, and then we said that you're allowed to make the coffin if the niftar is in the courtyard. So the Gemara quotes a brisa that has this halacha in there as well, and it says you're allowed to do all the needs of the dead. You're allowed to cut its hair. You're allowed to wash its clothing. You're allowed to make a coffin. You're allowed to make planks to make the coffin. You can make those planks before Yom Tov. Shimon ben Carmelio says you're even allowed to bring the wood, and you can make the planks as long as you do it quietly. You do it carefully. And it should be bitzina. It shouldn't be a public activity. There are several halachas which l'shem and mitzvah you're allowed to do on Chol HaMoed, but it has to be bitzina. It cannot be a widely publicized activity. Alright, now we get to our next mission, which discusses getting married on Chol HaMoed. So the Mishnah begins and it says you're not allowed to get married on Chol Moed, not a first marriage, that is marrying a woman who has never married before. Not allowed to marry a widower. You're also not allowed to do Yibum, which is where you're marrying the widow of your brother who never had children, which is a special mitzvah of Yibum. All these things you shouldn't do because it's joy. Remarry explains you're not allowed to do a joyful thing on Yontif. Not that Simcha is Asar on Yontif, but Ein Ma'arvin Simcha v'Simcha. You do not combine two different Simchas. The Gemara will get more into exactly what's wrong with that. Now, the Gemara says the Mishnah says that you are allowed to remarry a divorcee. That is, if you divorced someone, you divorced your wife, you may remarry her because that's not such a great simcha. The woman's allowed to prepare her jewelry. She's allowed to do makeup on Chol Moed for the wedding, towards the wedding. Rabbi Yehuda says she should not do the procedure of sud, which is where she puts lime on her skin to remove hair and to create a flush. That is painful, uncomfortable, and makes her feel horrible. And if you don't want to do that on Yom Tov, it's not the kind of thing you want to have on Yom Tov. The Mishnah ends off with the halachas of sewing. The Mishnah says that a professional is not allowed to sew professional-looking stitches on Yom Tov. It's considered a tircha. It's professional work. He is allowed to sew uneven stitches that are far apart, which look like the teeth of a dog, the Gemara says. A layman who's not an expert is allowed to sew to the best he can. He doesn't have to do anything strange. As far as constructing a bed that you put together, so the Mishnah says you can do misargin and you can't do mimatchin, but Rabbi Yossi says you can even do mimatchin. The Gemara will explain what misargin and mimatchin are. Okay, now the Gemara begins. The Gemara wants to know what's wrong with doing a wedding on Yom Tov. The Gemara gives 4 explanations, a number of opinions for each. First one is, like we said, Ein Ma'arvin Simcha b'Simcha. You cannot do one Simcha when you have another Simcha going on. You don't want to minimize the Simcha by doubling them up. Second shot is that you will neglect Simchas Yom Tov because you'll be busy with the Simcha of your wife. The Gemara quotes a pasuk with that. It says, "V'samachta b'chagecha." On Yom Tov you should be happy about the Chag. You should not be happy about other things, such as the fact that you just got married. Gemara's third shot is that it's too much work. A wedding requires a tremendous amount of work. You shouldn't do that on Yom Tov. It'll distract from the other. And the fourth shot is that if you allow people to get married on Yom Tov, they would always get married on Yom Tov. You never get married the rest of the year. They will all want to wait for Yom Tov so that they could use the Sudas Yom Tov as a Sudas wedding because that saves a lot of money. And therefore you would have a lack of Puriya Verivya. People would be married less. They would wait to get married until Yom Tov. So now the Gemara says, kasha on all of these is the fact that we have a brisa that says you're not allowed to get married on Yom Tov, but you are allowed to get married Erev Yom Tov. That means that your Shever Brachas will continue into Yom Tov itself. So according to all of them, the Simcha of the Shever Brachas, the Tircha of the Shever Brachas, and the fact that people will wait until Erev Yom Tov to be able to do it so they could have the Yom Tov Suda, be the wedding Suda, all these don't make sense. Why should he be allowed to get married on Erev Yom Tov? First, it's not a problem on either of them, because the main Simcha is the first day, the day of the wedding, and therefore if you do that on Erev Yom Tov, it's not considered to be distracting from Yom Tov itself, the fact that you have Shever Brachas that day. Also, the main work is on Erev Yom Tov, so I'm not concerned about the work of the Shever Brachas distracting from the Yom Tov. As far as people delaying their wedding until Erev Yom Tov, not likely to happen, because people aren't going to pin the fact on the wedding will come out one day. They realize something's going to happen that will make it, that it won't work out. If they have 7 days that they could hit it on any of the days of the Shever Brachas, then they would like that to be on Yom Tov. But if it's one day that they have to hit it on Erev Yom Tov, they're not going to push it off so that they maybe could have it work out that day.